Pike. They're going to walk the board through a presentation as to the project. At this point, we're very excited about it. We've been talking with them, obviously off and on for quite some time now, and they are prepared to present for the board tonight where we're moving. And I'm going to turn it either to Brian, I guess, or Peter, or Brian first, whichever one. So go ahead, gentlemen, you're on.
First of all, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Leanne Stefano, who I think you've all met. And then Steph Vito is one of our architects that's working diligently on this. Liz Bruno is our project manager, and Peter Buckley, of course, from Pike. And this is very much a team effort. We are in communication with Pike on a regular basis. I believe, with the tables in a similar configuration, we first presented to the board in the fall or late summer of 2009, I believe. And at that time, the board had indicated that they wanted, they had a project which involved primarily moving the stadium over to this site. And one of the requirements of bringing the stadium over was bringing locker rooms over. And then there were some ancillary goals. The primary one was rebuilding or renovating the band room. So like the other consultants that interviewed, we took a tour of the facility, and the first thing, we saw two things immediately. One was that the band room couldn't be renovated because the geometry of that room simply was not adequate. You couldn't get the volume that's now known to be required for a band room. And then secondly, we knew that if we brought and built locker rooms over here, the state would pay for it. But we also knew that if we built locker rooms inside the facility, if we renovated the facility, the state would pay for it. As irrational as that seems, that's how the system works. So we presented to you a scheme that showed the cannibalization, if I can say that, of the current art wing, and we were going to build locker rooms in there for the new facility. And then we showed an art room out front, and because we were cannibalizing the art rooms, we moved them up to the front and created a suite. I don't believe we had a board meeting where we talked about our visit to SED months and months later, and where we presented basically that scheme. And SED said they took a look at that back wing of the school. You have lockers for the pool, lockers for the gyms, and been a lot of growth and change there over the years. And the one thing SED surprised me with was a statement that, no way, we're paying for more lockers. You've got lots of lockers in that school. We're not going to pay for new lockers. So we came back, we worked with Paul, with the AD staff, and concluded that there were lockers there that were underutilized and we could simply renovate a locker. So that made SED happy. But that was the driving force in pushing the art rooms up and building them up front. And I mentioned that because I want to kind of walk people through the development of the project. And there's probably board members here who were not present 2 years ago, and I don't keep track of terms, etc. I'm sure there were. Going forward or backwards. So just to give you an update on where we're at with the project, this is a drawing that may, and help me, this is not something we showed at the presentation. This was probably the very first concept scheme. Yeah. So what is wonderful to tell you is that that entire site is now in drawings. It's precisely as you saw it. I mean, there's been refinements in terms of the details, but, and I'll show you that. Now, this is not colored, but this is the bus loop as shown in the concept, the parking lot is shown, the field where we showed it, the entrance area is all the same, the soccer field over here, and then the baseball diamond. So none of that has changed at all. Whitney, what?
Way up on the top. Yeah, thank you.
So the bus loop, yeah, all of that has been maintained precisely as was presented to the board months and months and months and months ago. So that's great news. So we're right on track with that. The inside of the building is a more complex story. When we started, as I mentioned, we originally had locker rooms back here. SED said that's not going to fly. So we moved a larger fitness room back there. We had some special ed rooms. And we had, originally, as I said, the art rooms up front, but but as we met with the faculty and the administration, and this goes back many months now, what we learned was that art and technology now share the same population, in essence. Years and years and years ago, when I was in high school, there was kids who took shop, and there was kids who were on academic tracks. Now, that population of kids who take art, either take art or technology, and it flows. Some years it's art, some years it's technology. It probably flows more like a 5-year pattern. So we realized that what we were doing is we were going to be creating an art suite up here, isolated, and then the technology folks down here. So we worked collaboratively with the administration and concluded that we really wanted to put art and technology together. That way, if one year there was a demand for 4 technology classrooms and 2 art, no problem. If there was 2 art or 2 technology and 4 art, over the decades you could just flow back and forth, and you wouldn't have some classrooms isolated up in the corner. So we set about looking at a renovation project, which when we started, we thought, well, this won't take much. We'll renovate a number of rooms, shouldn't have to do a lot to them. But you can see with the blue here, this is all going to be renovated space. Then we were starting to get a tremendous amount of renovated space, and when Pike did the first estimate at that, we were frankly shocked at how much it was going to cost. I think it was $1.5, $1.8 million to renovate these spaces. We just didn't have the budget for it. And the reason was, while we didn't initially think they would take much to make the changes, when we got into the rooms, we found, for instance, we have to change the ductwork and the HVAC. Well, the HVAC unit was 15 years old. It didn't make any sense to make all those changes without changing the air handling unit. But the air handling unit now is going to be bigger than the old one, so we'd have to change the steel a little. It was just a series of dominoes that made these renovations much, much more expensive than we thought they'd be, and frankly, not doable within our budget. So we revisited it, and we concluded that it still made no sense to build new art rooms up here and isolate them when you had this flow back and forth. Secondly, the district population has been shrinking and is projected to continue to shrink. Probably at some point that shrinking will stop and it'll be stable, but it's continuing to shrink. So the notion of building new classrooms when we had space in the room, in the building, didn't make a lot of sense. As opposed to the music rooms, which have to be built. You cannot renovate to get those spaces. So we zeroed in on a refinement to the plan, which had an expanded music capacity up here. And frankly, when we talked to the music folks, we found that what we first sketched, they weren't big enough. There was a lot more kids involved than we'd anticipated. So these band and ensemble rooms are bigger than the ones we first showed you. And then we've got a music theory room up here. Choral is going to be as it was, where the old band room was. And then we've reworked the entrance here so that we have, instead of the very first plans we showed you, in fact, I might be able to show that. Yeah, this was the addition back then, and this ended up, as we developed the plan, being almost an alley. We're going way, way, way back into this gap between the existing building and the existing here. The administration was after a situation where they could see people coming in the building and not have to have people go by and then come back to the office. So the current plan, and actually we can move on to the, okay. So the plan that we've ended up with has the band and ensemble room that I just showed you. They haven't changed at all. But you can see here we now have an entrance with a canopy closer to the front. So we're not bringing people way, way, way back into the tunnel. And the administration now will be configured so that they're looking right at people coming in the door. So you'll walk in, as you should in every school, you walk in and the first thing you see as a visitor is the control point. You can see that the blue has gone way, way down. We've got some renovation up here. We're still doing the fitness center, of course. The locker rooms are being renovated. And then over time, there's some minor renovation back here, which may or may not be done by district forces, depending on how bids come in. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So we've got a plan which, from a site standpoint, it's precisely what we showed you before, and from a building standpoint, has the primary elements precisely as you saw, somewhat enhanced, they're bigger music rooms. And we're back to doing very, very little renovation in the building as a whole. Now, I mentioned some minor renovation being done by the district if the bids are a challenge. The public at large believes that estimators can do some math and tell you where bids will be. When we started this project, we just had some scratches on paper. Then as schematics, we have some basic drawings. As our drawings advance, the estimators have more and more detail to work with. But we still have a necessity to track that project financially from the very beginning. These are some bids that came in April 2nd at a school district project up in Niagara County. Now, the contractors who bid on this, that's their business. If they bid too high, they're not going to get the job. If they bid too low, they're going to get it and lose money. So it's the life and death of that business to look at what's on paper, which describes every nut, bolt, everything, and say this is what it's going to cost. And it's instructive to see where we're at. So the general construction, the low bid was 3.13, high bid's 3.3, and 8% spread. Well, that's pretty good. All right, that's bidders that are all kind of looking at things the same way. The site work, 2.7 to 3.5, a 28% spread. All right, so these are, in that case, 6 contractors looking at the exact same set of drawings with their business depending on the accuracy of their bid, and there's a 28% spread. So Pike is going to be doing bidding throughout, estimating throughout this project, and we count incredibly heavily on the accuracy of the bids, of the estimate. But we know when the reality of bids come in is that they can't tell us today exactly what the bids will be. But we can't come in over budget. We can't. If this project goes out to bid and comes in over budget, everything stops. It has to be redesigned, and we'd probably be 18 months down the road trying to figure this out. So what we'll be doing in the next phase is developing alternates. Alternates allow you to bid out the core project and then have a series of elements which could either be added to the project if you have more money, if the bids come in low, you can accept the alternates, or they can be deducted from the project if the bids come in high. All right? So those are the tools we use to make sure that when bids come in, we can accept the bids and either accept alternates or accept deducts. In this project, we accepted, I believe, 7 add alternates. 7 things the district would like to do if they had money, we were able to do them because the bids came in favorably. So that's the tool we use to make sure that when the bids are accepted, when the bids come in, we can accept the bids that day and not have to stop the project. By the way, just as a frame of reference, this is like the stock market, no guarantee. That project had an estimate of 8.6 million, it came in at 7.6, about 12% under. For the last 3 years or so, contractors have still been extremely hungry and have been bidding very, very aggressively. It's starting to change. Contractors are starting to have a little more work and they're becoming less aggressive.
It's still a pretty flat market, which you don't see in too many things. Over probably the last 2 to 3 years, pricing has essentially stayed the same, which I'm not sure too many industries where that happens.
Well, inflation.
But in our case, in construction, the last 2 to 3 years has been pretty flat. So what we're seeing right now, I came from a bid opening to get here. We opened a bid today on a $16 million school project in Rochester. We're the CM, same as we are here. And the bids, total of the bids came in $100,000 under our estimate. So on $16 million, we were within $100,000, which is pretty good, especially in this period. So the other things that we're seeing now, and you see it in these numbers as well, the GC numbers are kind of staying the same. Little bit escalation based on some fuel increases and things of that nature, but the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing numbers are really starting to be much more dynamic numbers and much much more challenging to track. And those are tied to, just the amount of work out there, commodities costs like copper, aluminum. Again, petroleum derivatives have a huge impact on projects, whether it's roofing, just the cost to run equipment. There's a lot of building materials that are made with petroleum, so any plastics. And so we're seeing the mechanical, electrical, plumbing numbers are starting to tick up. And over the last 6 months, we've noticed this trend again. I work at a company where we're probably bidding 5 to 7 projects every week as a GC. And so we have that knowledge in-house of where things are trending. And this is really indicative of where things are going right now. We're starting to see the mechanical, electrical, plumbing stuff go up 10 to 12%. And again, we're factoring that into our estimate. That's part of our duty, is to be the guardian of your budget, because as Brian stated, there's no way a school project can be over budget. We have a referendum amount, that's it. That's all the dollars are. So we have to be very judicious in how we look at that stuff. And again, as Brian also mentioned, during schematic design, it happens on every project. There's this little thing called scope creep. And everybody says, oh, this project's finally for real. I'd like to have this, I'd like to have that. And again, in the beginnings of a project, you look at those things and see what kind of options you can afford. And our job is to tell you, to the best of our ability, what you can afford. And so we looked at that and said, look, these renovations, they really kind of mushroomed. It was kind of a domino effect of, well, if we move this one room, then it has an impact on 2 more rooms. And we calculated all that up and said, this renovation needs to go back to where it was initially. So we finished the schematic estimate, just to give you an idea where we're at. We're in the process right now of doing our DD estimate, which is the next phase of design. We are, the core of the project, all the things Brian discussed, are on budget. So field, stadium, music addition, the small amounts of renovation that we already figured in the beginning. All those things are within our budget. We're in good shape from a budget perspective. As the design continues to develop, we'll continue to be rigorous as far as investigating things. As Brian stated, again, we're working very closely with them on types of building systems, little detail things. We looked at the types of clips we're using on acoustic panels in the band rooms, and right down to the minutia. So those are the kind of things we're looking at as we get in, as the design develops, to try to make sure that we keep that core project within our budget. And then, as he stated, we'll use alternates as a means to either just kind of basically protect ourselves on bid day, because it is a very dynamic thing. There's a little bit, more than a little bit of art, as well as a science to it. And so that's kind of what